me straight. Alex, you're up. Sorry about that, y'all. Alex Wilson's going to come up and he is going to say a few words about Mr. Paul. Yeah. Will that work?
I can turn on my I don't know how to follow that. You could pick one word to describe Paul St. Louis, what would it be? Just one word. Unique. And if we could ask that same question to everyone who ever met Paul, what do you think would be the most commonly chosen word? Unique. I think we should pause for just a minute and think about it, because I know his spirit is here with us, and that's exactly what he wants us to do. I can hear him telling me, Smiley, his nickname for it, get everybody to shut up and take a minute to think deeply about me and nothing else. Well, at least 20 different words came to mind for me instantly, and I imagine most of you came up with a similar list. Words like crazy, or 3 words like really freaking crazy. Other words that come to mind when any of us think of Paul are creative, entertaining, talented, musical, athletic, charismatic, authentic, wild, rebellious, uncontrollable, unpredictable, passionate, intelligent, emotional, perceptive, intuitive, bipolar, hippie, freak, punk, wise, Zen Taoist Christian agnostic genius. Well, the number one word I bet most of us had at the top of our list is cool. Actually, I bet most of us said to ourselves that he was super cool, like off the charts insanely cool, like the coolest person we ever met cool, right? Before I get started with sharing some stories about my friendship with Paul, it's good to recognize how it was not unique. Friendships meant everything to him. And one of the reasons he had so many friends, One of the reasons he had so many friends was because of his fun-spirited way of connecting with people. He had an amazing memory bank going back to his early childhood, and he loved to reminisce on things that any of us experienced together. When he talked about the past, he had a way of bringing a whole story back to life by recalling a particular detail which perfectly captured some moment in time. The memories would suddenly become so vivid when he spoke. Every friend here knows exactly what I mean. And if any of you were up here sharing your stories instead of me, I think we all would paint a similar picture of Paul. So with that in mind, I believe my story will sound super familiar to you, and I'm hoping it triggers many of your own great memories of Paul. All right, here we go. I met Paul St. Louis on the school bus my first day of school in first grade, 1968, 55 years ago. I was 6 years old and he was 8, and soon he became my brother Bobby's best friend. Even though I had the vocabulary of a goldfish at that age, I can honestly say my first impression of him was exactly the same as it remained throughout our whole lifelong friendship. All of those descriptive words I mentioned a minute ago capture the essence of Paul. When you look at old photos of his preschool years, you can see that this dude was simply born cool, and it never left him. A lot of his coolness came from his mom. Her hipness actually had a very similar vibe to Paul's wife, Alex. Nothing seemed to faze her, and she had an unlimited supply of patience with Paul, and her love for him was truly unconditional. Excuse me. Got him nervous. Paul was ahead of his time even in elementary school. Sports were at the center of everything for us as kids. Every day after school, Bobby and I would ride our bikes somewhere to meet up with Paul and other friends to play football, baseball, or basketball. Usually at a friend's yard on Chapman's Landing Road, the Mileses or the Gimmels, Paul's neighbors. As you can imagine, Paul was extremely competitive, and to say he didn't handle losing very well is a bit of an understatement. In his mind, he became O.J. Simpson when running the ball, Willie Mays when swinging a bat, Pistol Pete when shooting a shot, or Muhammad Ali when we put on boxing gloves in his basement. He had a supreme level of confidence in his abilities, and his performance usually came remarkably close to matching his imagination. We all were fairly athletic, or at least we thought so, but he frequently made us look like chumps when it came to game time. As Troy said in his amazing tribute song, Paul let you know that you couldn't block a shot. And this is another trait he carried through life. Troy and I talked about this a bit. Troy noted that when Paul performed songs by the Sex Pistols, he was Johnny Rotten. And when playing the Stones, he was Mick Jagger. And of course, when playing his favorite of all, Bob Dylan, he was Bob Dylan. This isn't to say that Paul wasn't original, because he most definitely was 100% an original. He just appreciated great talent when he saw it and had a passion for understanding it in a way that was foreign to the rest of us and uniquely his own. Paul was always the first to share any news or information about what was happening in the world, especially in regards to sports and pop culture. He made Bobby and I aware of the Beatles on our very first visit to his house when he was 8. He set up this area outside on the edge of the woods with buckets and brooms where he made us pretend to be the Beatles. Maybe we were the world's first air band, I don't know. The thing I remember most about it was laughing my head off over him naming me Ringo as he sat me on a bucket and put a couple of sticks in my hands. The name Ringo sounded hilarious to me. I think I was confusing the Beatles with the Monkees comedy on TV, but it didn't take long to realize Paul was dead serious about this stuff. His enthusiasm was much bigger than just sports and music though, like Hot Wheels, or good food, or whatever. With Hot Wheels, he loved to show off his new cars and the new accessories he got for that cool orange Hot Wheels track. And I'm sure you can picture him describing how extra fast his cars were. With food, I always think of his mom taking us to a Shakey's pizza parlor, because Shakey's had a commercial that got Paul's attention, and he just had to go there. As soon as he bit into a slice, he jumped up and skipped around in a circle, then returned to the table, pointed at the pizza, and proclaimed it to be the best in the world. I don't remember ever going to another Shakey's, but I'm guessing their pizza wasn't any better than average. It definitely wasn't good as Pizza Hotline's pizza that George Heinze donated today. Paul also made us aware of every big must-see event, like calling us on the phone to remind us when Evel Knievel was coming on Wide World of Sports. Anything you can think of that was new and exciting, we heard about it first from Paul St. Louis. He was our Facebook. He was truly like another... He was truly like another big brother to me in many regards. Like any kid does with a big brother, I always wanted to know what Paul was up to, what he was thinking. And I always sought ways to make him laugh, which was never hard to do. We shared an interest in those things, especially things that were strange, bizarre, and unexplainable, the absurdity of life in general. His enthusiasm about stuff was infectious and even kind of intoxicating to me back then. Some people, I think, couldn't relate to his intensity or couldn't handle it. As I was writing this, it occurred to me that having patience with Paul's exuberance came naturally for Bobby and I, because in many ways his personality was a lot like our father's. Those of you who knew my dad might appreciate this comparison. They both were super charismatic and loved having an audience for their wild antics. Both were overly excited about anything that captured their attention. Both had zero patience for anything that blocked them from doing whatever their minds were set on. And both had their share of explosive, short-lived temper tantrums. The greatest trait they shared, though, was their childlike, wide-eyed enthusiasm for life and the innate compulsion to burn their candles at both ends. Whenever Paul came to our house, it seemed like the first thing he wanted to do was find out what my dad was up to. He wanted to see all his crazy chainsaw carvings and would ask if he was going to set off some explosives. And ask my dad if he was going to set off some explosives. My dad would always say, "No, not today." And then later he'd blow something up when we were least expecting it. So to no surprise, Paul and my dad really liked each other. Dad didn't usually like having rambunctious kids around our place. But for a reason I didn't understand until now, Paul was an exception. I'm realizing now that it's because they were somewhat looking in a mirror. He and my mom had a special relationship too, and I know he's smiling from seeing her with us here today. By the way, Paul said the little totem pole on his first album was a tribute to my dad, which I thought was pretty cool. I learned every cuss word from my dad, but Paul taught me the symbolism of the middle finger. I remember vividly one day on the school bus going home, he was super ticked off about something, but nobody knew why. When he got off the bus, I stuck my head out the window to yell something goofy at him and wave goodbye. But unlike other days, he just flipped me the bird and had a really angry look on his face. I didn't know what the hand gesture meant, but I could tell by the look on his face it wasn't good. It totally confused me, but my brother basically said, "Shut up, stupid, and don't worry about it." Bobby's response turned out to be the best advice for being friends with Paul. There were some days when he hated life, hated the world, and hated everyone alive. But he always bounced back in full force, and that was the case with this middle finger incident. The next day, he was back on the bus being his normal wild self and joking about making up some new hand gestures. Like sticking up your pinky finger, he said, meant you're ugly. He would talk about his ideas with such extreme enthusiasm that it felt like you were being informed of some urgent national news story. And of course, being a younger kid, he could say almost anything and I'd believe it. I spent months after that showing Bobby my pinky finger. Bobby, of course, would just laugh or beat me up, usually both. After elementary school, Bobby and I went to Charlotte Hall Military Academy. At the same time, Paul was on the verge of getting kicked out of public school because of his behavioral problems. His mother wanted him to go to Charlotte Hall with us. Surprisingly, Paul liked the idea too. It surprised me because he knew it meant he'd have to follow even tighter rules of conformity and he'd have to get a super uncool haircut. As we all remember, nothing was less cool in the 70s than having short hair. And if two words never ever described Paul, they were uncool and conformist. Within a year, Paul recruited Troy to join us at Charlotte Hall. So this meant Bobby and I could stop being completely embarrassed about having short hair because the two coolest guys in Indian Head would look just like us. For the record, Paul ended up adjusting to military school just fine. Much better than I did, for sure. It was during those years that he started calling me Smiley because I was always messing things up for our platoon by laughing at inappropriate times, which of course was any time. You're never supposed to laugh when your platoon is in formation, and that alone was hilarious to me. I mean, how can anyone keep them laughing when they're told they're not allowed to laugh? I never learned that trick. Anyway, outside of my crazy biological family, nobody was more responsible for turning me into this complex weirdo I am today than Paul St. Louis, and I'm deeply thankful for it. Telling the full story about Paul's life wouldn't be complete without mentioning his relationship with Troy and the entire Peterson family. Actually, a whole book could be written about his relationship with the Petersons. They adopted Paul and showered him with love his whole life, no matter how rocky his road became. And we all know how much they meant to him. So just as I can partly blame Paul for my wackiness, I imagine he would partly blame John and Troy for his. I'll finish up by talking about Paul's best years. While writing all this about Paul, how his amazing life affected me and so many other people, I got the biggest smile about thinking of his final chapter. The best years of his life were by far the last 15. Paul called me the day he found out Connie was pregnant, and I was stunned by how genuinely happy and excited he was. There was something different about the sound of his voice that day. He sounded super happy and excited, and his tone had a seriousness and a focus that wasn't like our usual conversations, which always went in countless random nonsensical directions. To be perfectly honest, I felt happy for him, and I was glad to hear him being so excited about fatherhood. But I really wasn't sure how he would do as a father. Like he said in his brilliant song, "I'd be a rambler." He took pride in being a vagabond, and no one should expect him to stick around very long. His father was hardly involved in his life, and I feared he would take a similar approach to parenthood. But man, was I wrong. So, Zoe changed him in ways. Sorry. Zoe changed him in ways I never imagined. I'm pretty sure it's the greatest transformation I've ever seen in a person. To me, it looked like he suddenly became aware of his purpose in life. Since the day Zoe was born up until the day all passed, his mind was always on her. He also knew how blessed he was by having Connie and Alex in his life. You three calmed him down so much that he fell in love with golf. I know this might seem like a strange way to end the eulogy, but I really want to thank you three, Zoe, Connie, and Alex. For the gift you gave. I want to thank you for the gift you gave to our friend Paul. He brought an abundance of fun and happiness into the world, and you three enabled him to leave it with the same peaceful mind and nothing but love in his heart. God bless you.